substantially influenced what my mother said. The interview was a major contribution to making my parents' relationship worse.
The Royal Archives, once a quiet place of history, became the center of chaos when Camilla gave a chilling order. Erase her name. She meant Diana, the beloved Princess of Wales, William's mother. That one command cut through the palace like a blade. William's face turned pale, then red with fury. To him, it wasn't just about records, it was about dignity, love, and memory. The air turned heavy, whispers spread, and every step William took echoed with wrath. What followed was not just anger, it was a storm that the palace was not ready to contain. The whisper in the corridor. The palace was unusually quiet that morning. A silence so deep rested in the long corridors of Buckingham Palace that even the ticking of the grand clock seemed too loud. Behind heavy doors, the world's most guarded traditions sat in rows of paper, old ink, and polished wood. This was the hidden heart of the monarchy, the archives where memory was kept alive. A young archivist named Henry worked alone that day, his hands covered in cotton gloves, his eyes bent over stacks of letters and records. He loved the silence here. It was not just a job to him, but a sacred duty, a way of touching history. Every folder he handled carried stories of love, loss, and power. He felt safe in this world of memory, far from the noise outside. But that morning, something different appeared on his desk. A sealed envelope with the royal crest, carried down with the stiff authority of the master of the household. Henry's heart skipped. Orders rarely came this way. He opened it carefully, eyes running over the sharp words written in perfect script. The message was short but heavy. All official mentions of Princess Diana's name were to be phased out from the palace archives, exhibits, and documents. Henry read the line again, as though he had misunderstood. But the words did not change. They stood cold on the page, stripping away a name that had once filled these very walls with warmth. His hands trembled. "Remove her name?" he whispered, the sound swallowed by the shelves around him. The thought itself seemed impossible. Diana was woven into every corner of the palace's history. She was not just a name in records, she was a memory still alive in people's hearts. Henry felt the weight of the order pressing down, as though the air itself had grown heavy. He sat back, stunned, trying to understand what he had just read. Within hours, whispers began spreading. Quiet voices moved through corridors, carried by servants who knew better than to speak too loudly. In the kitchens, the staff huddled close, their words trembling with disbelief. "They can't mean it," one said, staring at the floor. "It's true, it came directly from Queen Camilla herself," another whispered. No one dared raise their voice. The fear of the palace rules was stronger than the outrage they felt. But inside, every servant who remembered Diana, the way she had smiled at them, the way she had spoken with kindness, felt the sting of betrayal. Old butlers who had once opened doors for her stood frozen in silence, their memories clashing with the command now hanging over them. Gardeners who had watched her walk the grounds lowered their eyes, too afraid to admit the pain that twisted inside them. Even the younger staff, who had only known Diana through stories and pictures, felt the sudden chill of her name being cast away. It was as though a shadow had crept over the palace. A silence deeper than usual filled the rooms, a silence that carried sorrow. The walls themselves seemed to ache, remembering the woman who had once walked their halls. "History is being erased," an aide muttered under his breath, quickly glancing over his shoulder to be sure no one had heard. In every corner of the palace, hearts were unsettled. The order was not simply about paper or ink. It was about erasing a presence that had never truly left. Diana's memory still lingered in the palace, in every whispered story, in every smile recalled. To push her name into silence was to close the door on truth itself. By evening, the unease had grown into something heavier. Servants avoided eye contact, afraid their eyes might reveal what they were thinking. Conversations dropped into silence whenever footsteps echoed down the corridors. A sense of mourning filled the air, though no one had passed away.
Princess of Wales has in fact been killed in that car accident in Paris just a few hours ago.
The palace had weathered scandals, tragedies, and storms, but this felt different. It was not the world outside striking at the monarchy. It was a wound from within, a decision made by the Queen herself, carrying the power to change how history would be remembered. And yet, behind locked doors, Small acts of defiance stirred quietly. A chambermaid paused in her work, her hands resting on a photo of Diana tucked inside a drawer. She closed it gently, as if to protect it. A guard at the entrance shifted uncomfortably, recalling the day Diana had stopped to speak to him, calling him kind. The stories lived on, hidden in hearts, even as official orders sought to silence them. Night fell over Buckingham Palace, but the order remained, hanging in the air like smoke after a fire. The great building seemed colder somehow, its golden glow dimmed by the thought of a name being erased. In a quiet room, a senior aide finally broke the silence. He leaned closer to a trusted friend, his voice trembling. "This cannot stay hidden. He must know." The friend's eyes widened. "You mean Prince William?" "Yes," the aide replied softly. "This is his mother. He must be told before it goes further." And so the word began to move carefully and quietly from one hand to another, until it found its way out of the palace walls. The news carried not like a shout, but like a whisper, steady and unstoppable, heading toward the man who had lived his life under the shadow of the woman now being erased, Prince William. The order had not reached his ears yet, but it was on its way. It moved through careful channels, through trusted voices who knew that some truths could not remain buried. The palace might silence its corridors, but no silence could be strong enough to keep this from him. And as the night deepened, the stage was set. The son of Diana would soon hear the words that would set fire to his heart. A son's fury awakens. The evening at Kensington Palace had begun softly, as most family evenings did. The lamps glowed warmly in the drawing room, their golden light falling across shelves of books and photographs. The children's laughter floated down the hallway, gentle and carefree, as Catherine guided them toward bedtime. Prince William sat near the window, half lost in thought, the weight of the day already pressing upon his shoulders. It was supposed to be an ordinary night, one of those rare moments when the world outside could be forgotten for a little while. But ordinary had no place in the life of a prince. A knock sounded at the door, light but firm. A trusted aide stepped in, his face pale, his eyes filled with unease. He bowed slightly before holding out a folded paper. William sensed the heaviness before the words even reached him. "What is it?" William asked quietly, his hand hovering over the paper. The aide hesitated, then placed it in his hand. "It concerns Her late Royal Highness, the Princess of Wales." The moment the words left his mouth, the room seemed to change. The sound of children faded, the fire's glow dimmed, and the silence grew sharp. William opened the paper slowly, his heart tightening with each word his eyes traced. It was an official notice, brief and cold, carrying an order that felt like a blow. All references to Princess Diana were to be removed from the palace archives and official records. For a moment, William stared at it as though the words could not possibly be real. His chest rose and fell, his eyes scanning again, searching for some mistake. This cannot be right," he whispered, his voice breaking the stillness. But the paper did not change. It stood before him like a wound that refused to close. His disbelief cracked into something darker. Heat surged through his veins, an anger he had not felt in years. "How dare she?" His voice shook, low but filled with fire. He rose from his chair so quickly that the paper slipped from his hands and drifted to the floor. He pressed his palms against the window frame, staring out into the night as though the darkness could steady him. Memories came rushing back, uninvited yet unstoppable. He saw his mother's face as clearly as if she stood before him, the sparkle in her eyes, the warmth in her laughter, the way she bent down to speak to people others ignored. He remembered her hand on his shoulder, her voice telling him he was loved. But then came the darker memory, the one that never truly left. The flashing lights of Paris, the phone call that tore his heart apart, the endless grief of a boy forced to walk behind his mother's coffin. The pain swelled inside him, mixing with the fury that now consumed him. "They want to erase her," William said bitterly, turning from the window. His eyes burned, his fists clenched. "The one thing I have left of her is her legacy, and they want to strip even that away." Catherine entered quietly, her presence soft but steady. She had seen the storm brewing in him even before she heard his words. The look on his face told her everything. She bent to pick up the fallen paper, her eyes reading the lines with silent horror. She folded it back carefully, her hands trembling ever so slightly. "William," she said gently, "you must breathe. You must not let this break you tonight." But William shook his head, pacing the room like a man who could not find his footing.
how you've been able to cope, really. And I put that down to your really early years, childhood experience. But also...
How can I breathe when they try to bury her memory? My mother gave everything to this family, to this country, and now Camilla dares to... His words faltered, choked by the fire in his throat. Catherine moved closer, her voice calm, though her heart ached for him. I see the storm in you, but listen, this is a battle only you can face. No one else can carry this for you. Her eyes met his, steady and unflinching. She knew she could soothe his pain for a moment, but she could not take away the duty that bound him. He was not just a son mourning his mother, he was an heir torn between love and crown. William sank into a chair, his head in his hands. For a long time he said nothing, only fought the war inside him. His duty whispered to him of silence, of patience, of waiting for the right moment. But his heart screamed for action, for justice, for his mother's name to be defended. He remembered her walking through hospital wards, holding hands with the sick, smiling through pain, standing against fear. She had never turned her back on people. How could he turn his back on her? Yet the weight of the crown pressed down. To act against the Queen was no small thing. It was a move that could split the family, shake the institution, and scar him in the eyes of those who watched. He felt trapped between two impossible roads, one of silence that betrayed his heart, and one of truth that threatened his duty. Catherine knelt before him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. You loved her. You still love her. That love must guide you. But be wise, William. Do not let anger alone lead you. Anger will burn you from within. He lifted his head slowly, his eyes wet but fierce. I cannot be silent. I will not watch them erase her as though she never lived. She is my mother. She is the reason I am who I am. If I do nothing, then I betray her. Catherine said nothing more. She only squeezed his hand, giving him the strength she always carried in her quiet way. The room fell into heavy stillness. Outside, the night pressed against the windows, the city lights distant and faint. Inside, William sat upright again, no longer lost in confusion. His eyes had changed. They carried the fire of decision. He stood slowly, each movement filled with resolve. He walked to the desk, lifted the paper once more and stared at it as if engraving its words into his memory. Then he spoke, his voice low but unshakable. I will confront her, he said. She may wear the crown, but she cannot erase my mother. Not while I live. Catherine watched him, knowing the path ahead would not be easy. But she also knew that this vow, spoken with such quiet strength, was not one he would ever break. The night closed around Kensington Palace, holding within its walls a storm that was only just beginning. Confrontation in the shadows. The day was gray, the sky stretched heavy with clouds that threatened rain. Clarence House stood in its quiet grandeur, its tall windows watching over London with the same guarded stillness it had carried for centuries. Inside, the halls were hushed, servants moving with careful steps, sensing that something important was about to take place. Prince William arrived without ceremony, his car pulling discreetly into the courtyard. He stepped out with a face set in stone, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with the weight of what had brought him here. The guards bowed, the doors opened, and he was led inside. The drawing room where the meeting had been arranged was bathed in soft lamplight. Heavy drapes blocked out the world, and the air smelled faintly of polished wood and roses. The silence in the room was sharp, a silence that seemed to lean in, waiting for the clash to begin. Camilla was already there, seated in a high-backed chair with a calm expression, though her eyes flickered with unease. She held a glass of water in one hand, her fingers wrapped too tightly around the stem. William, she greeted him softly, though there was no warmth in the word. Camilla, he answered, his voice low and steady. He closed the door himself, the click echoing like a final seal. For a moment, neither spoke. They only studied one another as though searching for weakness. The space between them felt smaller than it was, filled with all the years of unspoken history, all the ghosts neither wished to name. William broke the silence first. He stepped closer, his tall frame casting a shadow across the rug. I've come to ask why, he said. Camilla tilted her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. Why what? Why would you order my mother's name to be removed? His words cut clean, no hesitation, no softness. Camilla set her glass down, folding her hands in her lap. Because this palace cannot live forever in the shadow of the past, she replied evenly. Every time her name is spoken, every time her memory is displayed, it keeps the monarchy tied to wounds that never heal. We must move forward. We cannot keep haunting ourselves. William's chest rose sharply. He stared at her as though he could not believe she had said it aloud. Haunting? His voice trembled with restrained fire. You call her memory a ghost? Camilla held his gaze. I call it a weight this family has carried long enough. The air in the room seemed to tighten. William's eyes flashed with something fierce, something raw. My mother was not a weight. She was light, she was in love. She gave this family what none of us could, she gave it heart. To erase her name is to erase the very soul of what the monarchy is meant to stand for. Camilla leaned back in her chair, her composure unshaken on the surface, but her fingers tapped against her knee, betraying the tension beneath. History is complicated, William, and history must sometimes be written with restraint, for the sake of those who carry the crown. William stepped closer still, his voice rising just enough to pierce the quiet. History must be written with truth. And the truth is that my mother lived, she loved, and she gave everything until it executed her. Her story is not yours to erase. The words hung in the air like fire. Camilla's eyes narrowed, though her lips did not move. She was used to battles fought with silence, but William's fury was not something silence could contain. You think by removing her name you free this family, he pressed? No, you bury it in shame, you bury it in lies, and I will not let you. For the first time, Camilla's composure cracked. Her voice grew sharper, colder. You do not understand the burden of the crown. You speak as a son, but I must think as a queen. Diana's presence, her legend, it overshadows everything. How is this monarchy meant to endure if it remains chained to the past? William's reply was quick, his words like steel. It endures by honoring the truth, not by running from it. The crown has survived wars, scandals, even betrayals, but it will not survive dishonor. And that is what you bring by striking my mother's name from these walls. The room seemed to shrink around them, the weight of their words pressing down on every corner. Servants passing in the corridor slowed their steps, their ears straining, sensing the storm within. No one dared come closer, but the air itself carried the vibration of raised voices. Camilla stood now, her figure tall but her face lined with strain. You think this is about dishonor? This is about survival. The monarchy cannot be built on one woman's memory forever. William's eyes shone with a fire that made him look more like the boy who had once walked behind his mother's coffin than the man standing before her now. It is not built on one woman's memory, he said, his voice shaking with the force of his heart. It is built on truth, respect, and service. My mother embodied all of those more than anyone. To erase her is to erase the very proof that this family can hold love within it. Silence fell then. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of two wills that refused to bend. Their eyes locked, neither looking away. The air so thick it felt hard to breathe. The ticking of the clock on the mantel became unbearably loud. Seconds dragged like hours, the tension filling every space between them. Finally, William spoke again, his voice lower now but heavier. I will not stand by, not as her son, not as her heir. If you continue this, you will have to face me and the truth I carry. Camilla said nothing. She only stared, her lips pressed tight, her face unreadable. The silence between them was more violent than any shout. William turned without waiting for an answer. He moved to the door, his hand steady as he opened it. For a moment he paused, his back still to her. You may try to erase her from the papers, from the archives, from the walls of these palaces, but you will never erase her from me, and I will not let you erase her from this country. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a final, echoing thud. The drawing room remained still, but the air was broken. Camilla sat back down slowly, her hands trembling despite herself. The weight of the confrontation clung to the room like smoke after fire. Outside, servants exchanged quick glances, their whispers hushed but urgent. The rift was no longer rumored. It had become real, alive, a storm that could not be hidden. In the heart of Clarence House, history had shifted. The family was no longer just divided in whispers, it was broken in truth. And everyone could feel the storm was only beginning. Catherine's silent strength. The storm inside William did not fade after Clarence House. It followed him home, heavy as a shadow, restless as fire. He walked the halls of Kensington Palace with a silence that frightened even the closest aides. His eyes seemed always set on something distant, his thoughts locked in a place no one could reach. But Catherine could feel it. She had always been able to sense the weight he carried, even when he tried to hide it. That night she found him alone in his study, the lamp burning low. The order from Clarence's house spread before him on the desk like an open wound. His head was bowed, his hands pressed against his temples, as if holding back the storm that threatened to tear him apart. She stepped inside softly, her presence calm, her movements deliberate. "William," she said gently, "you cannot let this consume you." He lifted his head and she saw the fury still in his eyes. "How can I not? She dares to erase my mother as though she never existed." His voice trembled, not from weakness but from a fire too great to contain. "I argued, I demanded, but she will not bend. Nothing I said mattered." Catherine moved closer, her eyes never leaving his. She did not answer right away because she knew words could lose their power if rushed. She waited until his breathing steadied, until his hands lowered from his face. Then she spoke, her voice soft but certain. "Your mother was strength itself," she said. "Do you think she would have fought with rage? No, William. She would have fought with grace, with dignity, with resolve. That is how her light shone so brightly, not through anger, but through unshakable resolve." William looked at her, his expression torn between grief and defiance. "But if I do not fight with fire, they'll bury her." "You are her son," Catherine replied, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "Her memory lives through you. You must fight, yes, but not like this, not with rage that burns you from inside. Fight with the same strength she gave to the world. That is how you will win." Her words settled over him like calm after thunder. He breathed deeply, the heat in his chest easing into something steadier. He knew she was right. His anger could not lead him, it would destroy him. But Catherine was not finished. She understood that William could not carry this war alone. Quietly, without fanfare, she began to move. She reached out to those who still cherished Diana's name, historians who guarded the truth, archivists who respected memory, even members of the family who whispered their support in hidden corners. She did not march into meetings or demand attention. Instead, she worked softly, carefully, weaving threads of quiet resistance that grew stronger with each passing day. In letters sealed with care, in hushed conversations away from watchful ears, Catherine built a shield around William. She gathered voices that would not be silenced, voices that believed history was not to be rewritten but remembered. An old archivist, his hair silvered by years of service, spoke to her in secret. "The Princess of Wales is not just a name," he said. "She is the truth of this palace. We will not let her be erased." A distant cousin of the royal line, seldom seen but quietly respected, sent her a message. "Her memory belongs to the people. I stand with you." Piece by piece, Catherine gathered these sparks of loyalty, creating a quiet fire that grew unseen. It was not rebellion shouted in the streets, it was dignity defended in silence. And through it all, she remained William's anchor. At night, when he returned weary and restless, she was there. When his thoughts threatened to drown him, she spoke words that steadied away him. She reminded him not only of the battle before him, but of the love that gave him strength to fight it. "Look at what she gave you," Catherine whispered one evening, her hand brushing over a photograph of Diana holding a young William. "Look at what she left behind. That love, that spirit, it flows through you still. She is alive in you, William, and in the way you carry her, she will never be erased." In those moments, William felt the fire within him shift. It no longer raged wild, it burned steady, clear, unbreakable. Their partnership, already strong, grew unshakable in those days. William realized he was not alone in this storm. Catherine was his shield, his balance, the voice that turned fury into clarity. Together they became the living proof that Diana's spirit had not left, it had simply moved forward through them. The palace could issue orders, papers could be signed, walls could be stripped of names, but no decree could reach into the unity William and Catherine shared. In their love, in their strength, Diana's presence remained alive, beating in every decision they made together. The staff who watched them these days felt it too. They saw Catherine moving with quiet determination, never loud, never forceful, but always steady. They saw William, once restless with fury, now walking with clearer purpose, his shoulders straighter, his eyes sharper. They spoke in whispers. The princess guides them still. At last, one evening, as the rain tapped softly against the palace windows, William sat with Catherine in the quiet of their drawing room. The fire glowed low, casting gentle light across their faces. He looked at her, his eyes steady now, no longer clouded by doubt. "You've shown me the way," he said softly. Catherine shook her head, her lips curving into the faintest smile. "No, William, I only reminded you of who you are. The rest was always inside you." He took her hand, holding it with quiet strength. For a long while they sat without speaking, the silence between them filled not with sorrow but with unity. Then William rose, his figure tall against the firelight. "I cannot keep this private," he said firmly. "This is no longer a battle fought in whispers behind closed doors. It must be seen. It must be heard. My mother deserves nothing less." Catherine looked at him with pride, her eyes shining. "Then we will face it together." In that moment, William found the clarity he had long searched for. His rage had transformed into resolve, his sorrow into strength. With Catherine beside him, he was no longer just a son mourning his mother. He was a man ready to defend her legacy before the world. The night closed around them, quiet and calm. But inside Kensington Palace, a new fire had been lit. A fire that would not fade. A fire that would carry Diana's name into the light once more. The breaking point. The secret was never going to stay hidden. No order, no sealed letter, no whispered command could bury the truth forever. What had begun as quiet murmurs inside the palace walls soon found its way into the world beyond. One evening, a trusted journalist received a tip. A single sentence passed across the line, sharp and chilling. "Princess Diana's name is being removed from the palace archives." By morning, it was everywhere. Headlines blazed across papers. News tickers scrolled the words in bright red. Radio stations hummed with voices of disbelief. The story spread like fire on dry grass, unstoppable, consuming every corner of conversation. At first there was shock. People read the words twice, their hearts refusing to believe them. Then came anger. Old wounds long buried split open again. The memory of Diana, her warmth, her humanity, her tragic loss, rose like a tide that could not be held back. Within hours, the palace gates were crowded. People came carrying flowers, photographs, and candles. Some held up posters with her smiling face, their voices shaking with fury. Others stood silently, tears in their eyes, as if mourning her all over again. "She gave us hope!" one woman cried, clutching a photograph of Diana with a child. "How dare they try to erase her?" A man beside her raised his voice. "We will not let her be forgotten. Not by them. Not by anyone." The chants grew louder. "Diana lives," they shouted. "Respect her memory." The sound rolled like thunder against the palace walls. Inside, tension gripped every hallway. Staff walked briskly, their eyes avoiding one another, yet their ears catching every whisper. Some felt loyalty to the crown, others to truth, but all could sense the battle tightening. Papers shuffled in secret, messages passed behind closed doors, alliances forming in the shadows. For William, the storm outside was not distant, it was a call to him. He had watched silently as the story grew, as the anger of the people swelled. He had seen their faces, the grief and fury written so clearly. He knew then that silence was no longer an option. In the quiet of Kensington Palace, he stood before Catherine. "I must speak," he said firmly. She looked at him with calm strength. "Then speak with your heart. That is what they need to hear." And so he prepared, not with advisors drafting lines, not with carefully polished words, but with truth that came from within him. When the moment arrived, he stood before cameras, the world's eyes upon him. His suit was dark, his expression solemn, but his voice carried the clarity of a son who refused to let love be erased. "My mother, Diana, Princess of Wales," he began, his voice steady but full of emotion, "was more than a figure in history. She was the light of compassion in our darkest hours. She showed us that love belongs at the heart of service, that kindness can change lives, that dignity is never lost when it is rooted in truth." The crowd fell silent, listening, the air heavy with reverence. "She is not simply a chapter to be closed," William continued. "She is the very reason so many believe in the goodness that can live within the crown. To forget her is to forget who we are meant to be. Her legacy is not mine alone. It belongs to all of you who loved her, all of you who remember her. And as long as I live, her name will not be erased." For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The cameras flashed, capturing every line of his face, every word carried across nations. His statement was not long, but it was enough. Enough to stir hearts, enough to remind the world of who Diana had been and what she still meant. The reaction was immediate. The crowd outside erupted in cheers and tears. People lifted photographs higher, their voices breaking into chants of, "William, Diana, we remember." Across the country, homes, cafes, and city squares were filled with the sound of his words replayed again and again. Headlines praised his courage. A son's promise, one paper declared. William defends Diana's legacy, another proclaimed. In distant lands, too, the story spread, reminding millions of the woman they had once admired, the woman they had lost too soon. For Camilla, the heat was unbearable. The plan she had believed would secure the future now threatened to undo her authority. Behind palace doors, she felt the weight of eyes upon her. Advisors whispered carefully, their words chosen with caution, but the truth was plain. Public anger was swelling, and it had a target. "Your Majesty," one aide said softly, "the people are unsettled. The prince's words have moved them. They see this order as an insult, not just to him, but to themselves." Camilla's lips tightened, but she said nothing. She felt the ground shifting beneath her. The palace itself became a battlefield of whispers. Leaks dripped through cracks like water seeping under a door. Some staff quietly sided with William, passing encouragement in discreet ways. Others clung to Camilla, insisting that time would quiet the uproar. But the unity of the household was broken. Divided loyalties stretched across every room, turning ordinary duties into silent wars. One archivist whispered to another in a dim corridor, "We cannot take her name away now, not after this." A guard at the gates confided, "The people are watching us closer than ever. The palace walls feel thinner each day." Even within the family, eyes shifted nervously, unsure of where to stand. No one said it aloud, but the rift was plain, growing wider with each passing hour. William, however, felt something different. For the first time since the order had reached him, his heart carried not only grief, but strength. He had spoken. He had lifted his mother's name into the light where it belonged, and the people had answered. That night, standing beside Catherine in their home, he looked out at the city lights. The storm was still raging, but he no longer felt lost within it. "She is with us," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. Catherine touched his hand, her voice steady. "She always will be." Outside, candles still burned at the gates, flickering in the night like stars fallen to earth. The voices of the people rose softly into the darkness, not in anger now, but in remembrance, in love. And within the palace walls, where whispers and loyalties twisted like branches in the wind, one truth had become unshakable. Diana's name would not be silenced, not while her son still stood. A son's triumph and a family's ruin. The palace had always been a fortress, built of stone, silence, and unshaken tradition. Yet in those days after William's statement, it felt like the walls were crumbling from within. Every corridor carried the weight of unease. Every room seemed filled with whispers that could not be silenced. What had begun as a private order had grown into a storm so fierce that no crown could withstand it. The pressure grew unbearable. The monarchy, used to controlling stories with careful words and polished smiles, now found itself trapped. The people were not calming down. They were angrier, louder, more united than anyone had imagined. Camilla felt it most. Once her words had commanded quiet obedience. Now her presence brought unease. Advisors spoke to her with lowered voices, their tones cautious, their eyes darting elsewhere. The certainty she once carried seemed to slip, leaving only a shadow of doubt. Late one evening, she sat surrounded by her closest aides. Their faces were pale, their voices urgent. "Your Majesty," one began softly, "the anger outside will not pass. The nation is against this decision." Another leaned forward. "The prince has spoken. His words have touched people more deeply than we expected. We cannot stand against that tide." Camilla's jaw tightened. "And what do you suggest?" Her voice was cool, but beneath it trembled a thread of fear. The room fell silent before a third advisor spoke, his words heavy with finality. "We must restore Diana's name to the archives. It is the only way to calm this storm." The sentence hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Camilla's fingers curled against the arm of her chair. She wanted to resist, to command, to insist on the authority she had fought so hard to secure. But she could see it in their faces. The decision had already been made. She was cornered not by enemies, but by her own household. At last, with a weary breath, she nodded. Do what must be done. And so it was. Quietly, without ceremony, Diana's name returned to its rightful place in the palace records. The act was simple, only ink on parchment, but the meaning was immense. The storm outside began to soften. The chants grew quieter, the fury turning to relief. The people had been heard, and Diana's memory had been restored. For William, the news brought victory, but it was a victory painted in sorrow. He had won, yet at a cost he could not ignore. When he heard that Diana's name was safe again, he felt a wave of relief wash over him. He thought of her smile, her voice, her kindness. He thought of how she had stood by the people, how she had loved without measure. For her, he had fought, and for her, he had triumphed. But in his heart, another truth pressed heavily. His bond with Camilla was broken beyond repair. Whatever fragile peace had once existed between them had been shattered in this battle. Her attempt to erase his mother's name had carved a wound too deep. She will never understand, William admitted one night, standing by the window with Catherine. The city lights flickered in the distance. And I will never forgive. Catherine stepped closer, her hand brushing his. Then let it be. Some wounds do not heal, but your mother's name is safe. That is what matters. William's eyes grew distant. Yes, but the family is falling apart. The days that followed carried both quiet celebration and quiet grief. To the public, William was the prince who had defended his mother's honor, a son whose voice had risen against silence. But behind the palace walls, every glance was sharper, every word more cautious. Divisions lay bare, impossible to hide, and William knew this was not a war that could be neatly resolved. One morning, as the world began to calm, William made a choice. He left the palace behind, traveling quietly to a place that held more truth than any archive, any record, any official story. The sun was soft that day, filtering through trees as he walked slowly, flowers in hand. He moved with the solemnity of a man carrying both victory and loss. At last he reached her resting place. The air was still, the earth quiet, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Kneeling, he laid the flowers gently before her. White roses, pure and simple, her favorite. His hands lingered, his head bowed. For a long moment he said nothing, letting the silence hold the weight of his heart. Finally his voice broke the stillness, low and tender. They tried to take your name, Mama. They thought they could write you out as if you had never been, but I would not let them. I will never let them. The words trembled, but his resolve was unshakable. I promise you, he continued, his eyes fixed on the stone, as long as I live, your name will remain. No crown, no order, no power will ever erase you. You live in me, in my children, in the people who love you still. That is your true archive. That is your legacy. A breeze stirred through the trees, gentle as a caress, and for a moment he felt her presence nearby, like the warmth of sunlight on his skin, like the echo of laughter long past. He closed his eyes, letting it fill him, steady him. When he rose, the sorrow was still there, but so was strength. He turned away from the grave, walking back into the world with his head held high. It was a bittersweet ending, one he could not escape. Diana's name was safe, her memory secure, but the price had been heavy.